What if the life you're meant to live is being quietly suffocated not by what you lack, but by what you refuse to release? Have you ever examined a day, a month, a year, and wondered why you feel so heavy, so still, when on paper you've done everything right? You've added the goals, the habits, the discipline, yet a fundamental vitality remains just out of reach. The modern world teaches accumulation, more knowledge, more connections, more achievements. But ancient wisdom and the depth psychology of figures like Carl Jung suggests a radical, quieter truth. Profound change doesn't begin with addition. It begins with a sacred subtraction. The most powerful evolution of your character, your peace, your very destiny, is often not about what you bravely pursue, but what you courageously let die. Because you are not an empty vessel to be filled. You are a garden, and some things have overstayed their season, their roots now choking the soil, preventing new life from breaking through. Today, we walk through 10 silent removals, not loud declarations, but private, internal emancipations. Each one is a key turning in a long locked door within your psyche. This isn't about fixing a broken self. It's about unburdening a true self. Are you ready to see what you've been carrying? Number 1, the silent removal of the ghost in your machine. We begin at the source of the echo. You make a new decision. You move to a new city. You start a new relationship. And yet, a familiar emotional weather rolls in, a specific flavor of disappointment, a particular strain of anxiety. It feels like fate, like a pattern written in your stars. But what if it's not destiny? What if it's a ghost? In Jungian thought, we all have complexes, psychic fragments, clusters of memory and emotion that split off from consciousness. Often through trauma or repeated experience, they form autonomous splinter psyches. And this is the ghost, a version of you from the past, frozen in time, holding a specific wound. This ghost doesn't shout, it whispers, it doesn't command, it suggests. You believe you are making a free choice in the present, but you are often following a script written by a past self, for a past situation that no longer exists. Imagine your mind as a grand library. Conscious you is at the front desk, choosing books in the light, but deep in the stacks, in the dim archives, a younger version of you is compulsively reshelving the same tragic novels, the same handbooks of lack, ensuring they are the only titles that ever reach the front desk. That child who felt unseen is still choosing partners who are emotionally distant, not out of desire, but out of a desperate, unconscious hope to finally be seen by someone who resembles the original overlooker. That teenager who was shamed for a mistake is still preemptively sabotaging success to avoid the risk of a shame that has already happened. The ghost is steering, and you, in the driver's seat, feel a mysterious resistance in the wheel. I recall a man, an accomplished architect, who could design breathtaking spaces, but lived in a perpetual state of cramped anxiety. He changed firms, changed cities, but the same stifling feeling followed. In exploration, he uncovered the ghost, a 9-year-old boy, brutally criticized by a perfectionist father for a messy drawing. That boy concluded, to be safe, you must be flawless, and flawless is impossible. So the adult man lived under a silent, invisible ceiling of impending criticism, a ceiling built by a child's logic. He wasn't living his life. He was living a 9-year-old's defense mechanism. Removing this ghost in silence isn't an exorcism, it's an integration. It's walking back into those archives, not with fear, but with the compassion of the adult you now are. You look at that frozen self and you say, I see you. I feel your fear. But look at my hands now. I am strong. I am here. You don't have to run the library anymore. The moment you acknowledge the ghost, it transforms from a director in the shadows to a memory integrated into your wholeness. The steering wheel, for the first time, goes slack, and then, firmly, it is yours. When you stop letting the past version drive, you confront a loneliness you've been running from, the ache to be fully decoded by another, which leads us to our second silent removal. Number 2, the silent removal of the translator's burden. How much of your mental energy is spent translating yourself, crafting the perfect explanation, rehearsing the justification, editing your truth into a more palatable draft for the audience of others? We carry a deep biological longing to be seen accurately and completely, so we become full-time translators of our own souls, desperate for someone to finally get the original text. But here is the painful, liberating axiom: no one will ever read the definitive edition of you except you. Their minds are not blank pages. They are libraries of their own, filled with their own ghosts, their own dictionaries. Your word passion may be translated by them as chaos. Your depth may be filed under complicated. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear for the social world. The tragedy begins when we glue that mask to our skin, thinking the approval it garners is for our true face. We start living for the applause of the mask and forget the face beneath is starving for air. I worked with a brilliant, intuitive woman whose mind made connections like a spiderweb catching morning dew. Beautiful, intricate, fragile, but in her corporate job, this was labeled unfocused or overthinking, so she spent years trying to translate her web like thinking into bullet points. She was exhausted, not by the work, but by the constant interpretation. The breakthrough came not when someone finally understood her, but when she stopped requiring it. She realized her clarity did not depend on their comprehension. Her inner authority was not a democracy. Think of a rare, deep-sea creature. It lives in a world of immense pressure and eternal dark, glowing with its own bioluminescence. It would be absurd for that creature to swim to the sunlit, noisy surface and spend its life trying to explain the deep to a seagull. Their realities are too different. The creature's power and beauty are inherent to its native environment. Your inner world is your native environment. When you cease the exhausting work of translation, you stop shrinking your soul to fit the vocabulary of others. You simply glow in your own depth, and a strange alchemy occurs. People may not understand your glow, but they are drawn to its authenticity. They feel the truth of it, even if they can't define it. Your need to be understood kept you small. Your decision to be, regardless, allows you to expand, and from that expansion you gain the clarity to see what in your life has, quite simply, stopped glowing. What has entered its own night. Number 3, the silent removal of expired light. Look around the room of your life, both physical and psychic. How many items on the shelves are there not because they illuminate your present, but because you fear the dark space they would leave behind? The relationship that became a polite habit, the career path that now feels like a worn-out groove, the identity, the reliable one, the rebel, the helper that you wear like a coat that no longer fits across the shoulders. We cling to expired light because the known dimness feels safer than the unknown void. But nature holds the wisdom here. A forest doesn't mourn its fallen leaves. It uses their decay to nourish the roots for the coming spring. The leaf's purpose wasn't eternal attachment. It was seasonal contribution, then release. Jungian psychology speaks of an antiadromia, the tendency of things to run into their opposite. The thing that once gave you life, if held too long, begins to drain it. The passionate startup becomes a stifling bureaucracy. The liberating rebellion becomes a confining identity. The energy has expired. Its season is over. Yet, We keep it on life support, afraid of the emptiness we equate with failure. But what if that emptiness is not a pit, but a vessel? Not a loss, but a capacity. I remember a woman, a gifted musician, who for years taught piano to disinterested children, draining her love for music itself. She said, "If I quit, the music in me dies." But the truth was the reverse. By staying, she was presiding over a slow funeral. When she finally released the teaching, the ensuing silence was terrifying. For weeks the house felt too large, her days formless. But in that quiet, a forgotten melody from her own youth began to surface. Then another. That emptiness wasn't void. It was a clean chapel where her own music could be heard again. She began to compose for the first time in 20 years. The expired light of teaching wasn't wrong. Its time had simply passed. Its removal made space for a different, more personal kind of luminescence. Removing expired light is an act of sacred honesty. You look at the job, the friendship, the habit, the belief, and you ask with gentle ruthlessness, does this still give life, or does it now only consume it? You listen not to the voice of fear, but I've invested so much, but to the quieter voice of your soul, which knows the true seasons of your being. You let the leaf fall. You trust the roots, but this process of release requires a certain strength, or rather, a certain permission to not always be strong, which uncovers our fourth removal. Number 4, the silent removal of compulsory strength. We have been sold a devastating lie that maturity looks like emotional stoicism, that strength is a fortress with no cracks. So we perform this caricature of resilience. We swallow tears, silence anger, numb fear, and present a polished marble bust to the world, while inside, the living flesh screams. Jung spoke of the shadow, not as evil, but as the totality of those parts of ourselves we deem unacceptable, too messy, too raw, too vulnerable, and he warned that we do not get rid of a complex by ignoring it. We merely drive it into the cellar of the unconscious where it gains power, like a backed-up river finding cracks in the foundation. Your anger, your sadness, your fear, your need, these are not weaknesses to be eradicated. They are vital messengers from your own depths. They are data. Compulsory strength is the act of shooting the messenger. You feel a rising grief, and you instantly optimize it, reframe it, drown it in productivity. But that grief was a signal, perhaps of a deep loss you haven't acknowledged. By refusing its message, you don't eliminate the pain, you guarantee it will manifest elsewhere, as chronic tension, as insomnia, as a diffuse bitterness that colors your world gray. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Suppressed emotion doesn't vanish. It amplifies activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, keeping your nervous system in a low-grade state of alarm. Your body literally stays ready for a battle it's not allowed to fight. The cost of being strong is paid in biological currency, inflammation, fatigue, a weakened immune system. True strength is integrative. It is the capacity to hold the full spectrum of your humanity without being shattered by it. It is saying, I am angry, and this anger tells me a boundary has been crossed. It is admitting, I am deeply sad, and this sadness honors what I have loved and lost. It is allowing the tremor in your voice. It is asking for help. This is not collapse. It is the ultimate integrity. When you remove the compulsion to be the unshakable one, you reclaim the power of your authentic presence. The energy you used to suppress the shadow now becomes available to integrate it, and integrated shadow energy is formidable. Its passion, its conviction, its raw creative force. The mask of strength is brittle. The reality of a felt, integrated humanity is unbreakable. And as you stop performing strength, You become acutely aware of who or what asks you to perform it. You notice the spaces where your natural size is not welcome. Number 5. The silent removal of spaces that demand you shrink. Your being has a natural size, a specific gravity, a particular shape, and you will know in your body when you are in a presence, a person, a job, a social circle that requires you to be smaller. It's not always dramatic. It's not abuse. It's a subtle, constant pressure, like atmospheric change. Your jokes become quieter. Your opinions become more guarded. Your expansive ideas are met with a polite blink, a subject change. You feel yourself folding inward, making yourself more compact, less obtrusive. Jung would say your soul is contracting. It is a self-protective maneuver in an environment that cannot accommodate its full vibration. This is perhaps the most insidious form of self-betrayal because it's often done in the name of love or loyalty or professionalism. You love them, so you hide the parts of you they find too much. You need the job, so you mute the colors of your creativity to match the gray cubicle walls. But each act of shrinkage is a small death. Your energy field literally draws in. Your posture changes. Your breath becomes shallow. You are, in a very real sense, disappearing. Consider a plant moved from a large pot to a small one. Its roots coil, bound by the new walls. It may survive, even produce a few leaves, but it will never reach its potential stature or bloom. It has adapted to confinement. Many of us live in psychic pots that are too small, and we mistake the cramped coil of our roots for our natural shape. A viewer once shared that in her family, she was the sensitive one, a label that over time became a cage. Any display of deep emotion was met with eye rolls, and there she goes again. So she learned to preempt the judgment. She would feel a wave of profound empathy or beauty and instantly cork it. Over decades, she described feeling like a radio that was perpetually tuned to static, the signal of her own soul just barely audible beneath the noise. Leaving that dynamic wasn't an act of rebellion against her family. It was an act of loyalty to herself. In the space she created, alone at first, the static faded, and the signal, her true emotional frequency, came in, clear and strong. You must silently remove yourself from spaces that demand a smaller you. This isn't about blame or drama. It's about physics. A large soul cannot fit in a small room. You find, or you build, the room that fits, and in that right-sized space, you will find that what you thought were personal flaws, being too intense, too quiet, too dreamy, were never flaws. They were fingerprints of your soul, waiting for the right surface to make their impression. As you stop shrinking to fit external spaces, you turn inward and confront the internal architecture you've mistaken for your foundation. The stories you believe are your personality. Number 6. The silent removal of borrowed limitations. Here lies the core of the self-made prison, the beliefs you did not choose, but inherited and now wear as if they were bones. I'm just not a confident person. I'm naturally disorganized. I'm bad with money. I'm an introvert, so I can't lead. These statements are often delivered with a shrug of finality, as if describing eye color. But they are not biology. They are biography. They are conclusions written by a younger you in response to specific events, and then forgotten as conclusions, remembered only as truth. Jung called these structures complexes, autonomous clusters of thought and feeling that live in the unconscious, masquerading as the whole self. You were not born believing you were not enough. You experienced a moment, or a series of moments where you felt unseen, uncelebrated, or compared. A young psyche, seeking to make sense of the pain, wrote the story, "The problem is me. I am lacking." That story, repeated, becomes a neural pathway. The pathway becomes a habit. The habit becomes an identity. The complex is now running the show, and you call it my personality. It is the ultimate camouflage. The prison walls are painted to look like the sky. I think of the singer Nina Simone. As a child prodigy, she faced brutal racism at her first classical piano recital. The complex that could have formed was, "My gift is not welcome in this world. I must be smaller." But she, with immense will, refused that borrowed limitation. She took the profound energy of her pain and her genius and channeled it into a new, defiant, monumental form of art. She didn't change her core, her monumental talent and passion. She changed the story about what that core could do and be. She integrated the pain into the power. Your task is to become an archaeologist of your own psyche. Gently brush the dust off these statements. I am shy. When did that story begin? What scene? I procrastinate. What was the early experience where your effort was met with indifference or ridicule, teaching you that trying was pointless? These limitations are not your essence. They are scars that you have mistaken for landmarks. When you see the scar as a scar and not as a fundamental part of your terrain, you begin to heal. The story loses its power. You realize your true nature is not the limitation, but the vast, aware space in which the limitation appeared. And in that space, choice is born again. But who is the voice that narrates these limitations? Who is the constant critic? This brings us to the seventh, and perhaps most intimate, removal. Number 7, the silent removal of the internalized critic. Inside your mind, there is a voice. It comments, predicts, chastises. You should have known better. They think you're incompetent. You'll never get it right. It sounds like you. It feels like the voice of reason, of sober realism, but it is not you. It is an introject, a foreign piece of psychological software installed long ago by a critical parent, a harsh teacher, a bullying peer, or a punishing culture. You have absorbed their gaze, internalized their judgment, and now you perform their criticism for them, saving them the trouble. You have become both the prisoner and the warden. Jung understood that much of our suffering is not a present moment experience, but the past, echoing in the chamber of the unconscious. The critic is that echo, mistaken for a live voice. It is a recording, and every time you believe it, you re-injure yourself with an old wound. The most capable, kind, and outwardly successful people are often plagued by this, because the critic is not responsive to external evidence. It operates on old data. You could receive a standing ovation, and the critic will whisper, "They're just being polite." Think of it as a haunting. The original person may be gone from your life, or may have even changed their mind, but the ghost of their judgment remains, pacing the halls of your inner world. A client, a fiercely intelligent writer, would physically freeze at the blank page. The critic's voice was her father's flowery nonsense. Stick to facts. She was 40, her father had passed, and she was trying to write a novel. But the ghost was in the room, killing every beautiful sentence before it could breathe. Her liberation began when she learned to label the voice. She would hear flowery nonsense and say, internally, "Ah, that's the father ghost. That is not my thought about my writing." She didn't argue with the ghost. She acknowledged its presence and then gently turned her attention back to her own creative impulse. Over time, the ghost, starved of belief, faded. Removing the critic is a practice of discernment. It is learning to distinguish between the clear, quiet voice of your own intuition, which may be firm but is never cruel, and the sharp, repetitive, fear-based voice of the introject. You starve the critic by refusing to fund it with your belief. You mute its volume by no longer confusing its commentary with reality. The moment you realize, this is not my voice, you reclaim your inner sanctuary. The silence that follows is not empty, it is peaceful, and in that peace you can finally hear yourself. Yet, to hear yourself, you must have the energy to listen, which unveils our 8th removal. Number 8. The silent removal of psychic sprawl. Your attention is your most sacred resource. It is the beam of your consciousness. Where you place it, you place your life force. Yet, we live in an age of sanctioned psychic sprawl. We fragment our attention across a dozen tabs, 3 screens, endless streams of content, the dramas of people we've never met, the curated highlights of distant acquaintances. We call it connection, information, entertainment, but it is often dispersion. It is the scattering of your one coherent beam into 1,000 faint, flickering points of light, none strong enough to illuminate anything of depth. You are not tired because you lack energy. You are tired because your energy is leaking from 1,000 tiny tears in the fabric of your focus. Jung spoke of the self as the central archetype of wholeness. It cannot speak to you, cannot guide you, if you are never whole enough to listen. Its language is intuition, synchronicity, deep knowing. These require a gathered mind, a collected psyche. When your energy is fragmented, you are a city with a brownout, lots of flickering lights, but no single street has the power to function fully. You make decisions from anxiety, react from irritation, and scroll seeking an answer that can only be found in the quiet you're avoiding. I recall a man, an entrepreneur, who described his mind as a browser with too many tabs open. He consumed podcasts at 2x speed, skimmed articles, monitored 5 group chats. He was terrified of missing out on the key insight, the crucial connection. His prescription, a digital Sabbath, one 24-hour period with no screens. The first few hours were a physical anxiety, a jittery withdrawal, but by the afternoon, a forgotten feeling emerged, boredom, and from that fertile boredom, a clear single thought about his business arose, a simple, elegant solution he'd been overcomplicating for months. The insight didn't come from more input. It emerged from the space created by less. Removing psychic sprawl is the act of building inner fences. It is consciously deciding what gets your priceless attention and what does not. It is closing the tabs. It is letting the text go unanswered for an hour. It is walking without headphones. It is reclaiming your cognitive territory, acre by acre. This isn't about productivity hacks. It's about sovereignty. As you gather your scattered energy, you become more solid, more present. Your intuition, that voice of the self, gains volume. You start to feel a subtle pull toward what is right for you and a gentle aversion to what is not. Decisions become clearer, not because you have more data, but because you have more signal. You are no longer a passive receiver of the world's noise. You are a broadcaster on your own frequency. And as you solidify on your own frequency, you become aware of a final, pervasive interference, the imagined audience for your every move. Number 9. The silent removal of the phantom gallery. You walk through your life, but you are not alone. In the imaginary seats of your mind sits an audience. Parents, exes, colleagues, vague societal they. You feel their eyes on you. You hear their hypothetical comments. What will they think? This fear is the tremor of the persona, the social mask. afraid of being judged inadequate. It is a primal fear. Exile from the tribe meant death. But in the modern psyche, this fear has metastasized, keeping us from wearing the wrong shoes, posting the authentic thought, pursuing the unconventional path. We live for the phantom gallery. Jung was clear. The persona is necessary for social functioning, but we must know we are wearing it. The disaster is when we mistake the mask for the face. The fear of their eyes is the fear that the mask will slip and the true, perhaps messy, face will be seen and rejected. But here is the secret the phantom gallery doesn't want you to know. They are not looking. They are the lead actors in their own dramas, worried about their own phantom galleries. Your cameo in their mind is brief and blurry. Think of a dancer in a studio, practicing before a wall of mirrors. She is focused on every angle, every line, critiquing each movement against an ideal. Now imagine the mirrors are two-way glass, and she believes an audience is watching from the other side. Her practice becomes a stiff performance. But what if the other side is empty? What if it has always been empty? The moment she realizes this, her movement transforms. It becomes fluid, authentic, exploratory. The studio is hers. The practice is for her own expression and growth. The phantom gallery vanishes, and with it, the performance anxiety. To remove this, you must conduct a simple, silent audit. When you feel hesitation, ask, who, specifically, am I imagining will judge me? Name them, then ask, are they in this room? Are they living my life? Do they pay the price for my choices or my inhibitions? Almost always, the answer is no. The eyes dissolve. You are left with yourself and your choice. This is the birthplace of authentic action. You choose the career, the relationship, the creative project, the quiet night in, not because it will play well in the phantom gallery, but because it resonates with the core of who you are. You stop performing a life and start inhabiting it. And from this place of inhabitation, you encounter the final, most subtle barrier of all, the need to be the sole author of every single page. Number 10, the silent removal of the tyranny of control. When you've done the work, released the ghosts, quit translating, reclaimed your energy, the ego, thwarted, makes its last clever stand. It says, fine. If we can't rely on others and we can't live for their approval, then we must control everything. Our plans, our outcomes, every variable. This is the illusion of the master planner. It manifests as relentless striving, overthinking, an inability to delegate or relax, a constant tension in the jaw and shoulders. You believe safety lies in this exhaustive micromanagement of reality, but this is not the voice of the true self. This is the ego, terrified of uncertainty, playing God in a world it cannot possibly command. Jung spoke of the self as the central, organizing principle of the psyche, which is itself part of a larger, intelligent order. He observed synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, as evidence of this a causal connecting principle. When you operate from the ego's need for control, you are like a sailor desperately trying to control the wind and the waves, exhausting yourself instead of learning to set your sail and trust the larger currents of the ocean. The ego's control is born of fear. The self's trust is born of connection. Consider a master gardener. She does not control the sun, the rain, or the genetic code within the seed. She cannot force a rose to bloom. What she does is create the conditions: fertile soil, proper watering, protection from pests. She tends. She trusts the intelligence of life within the seed. She partners with nature. She does not command it. Your life is the same. You cannot control external events, other people's reactions, or the unfolding of time. What you can do is tend to your inner condition, your beliefs, your attention, your emotional hygiene. You can set your sail, but you must trust the wind. A business owner I knew hadn't taken a real vacation in a decade. Her identity was fused with being the indispensable linchpin. A health scare forced a 2-week halt. She was convinced of imminent collapse. When she returned, not only was the business fine, her team had innovated solutions she'd never considered. Her absence had created space for their competence to grow. The collapse she feared was the collapse of her identity as the controller, not the collapse of the enterprise. Letting go of that control didn't ruin her life, it expanded it. It allowed her to be a leader, not a martyr. Removing the tyranny of control is about shifting from a posture of grasping to a posture of receiving. It is doing your part with excellence and integrity, then releasing the outcome. It is making the plan, then holding it lightly. It is listening for synchronicity, that book that falls off the shelf, the unexpected conversation that offers the exact insight you needed. These are not accidents. They are the language of the larger self, the universe's way of collaborating with you when you stop trying to dominate it. In the release of control, you don't find chaos, you find flow. When you look back at these 10 silent removals, a common thread emerges. Transformation is not an aggressive acquisition. It is a gentle, relentless shedding. Layer by layer, you remove what is not you, the old stories, the borrowed fears, the exhausting performances, the toxic attachments, the illusion of control. You are not building a new you from scratch. You are excavating the you that has always been there, beneath the accumulation. The true self, whole and intact, like a sculpture hidden within the marble. Jung's entire psychology points to this process of individuation, becoming who you inherently are by releasing who you are not. This work happens in the quiet, in the moment you choose not to react from an old wound, in the breath you take before defending yourself, in the courage to sit in the emptiness left by an expired light. This is where your new life is born, not with a bang, but with a series of silent internal no's that create space for the deepest yes. If anything in this journey resonated with you, if you felt a quiet click of recognition in your being, then this work has already begun. Share this with someone who might be carrying a weight they haven't yet named. And if you wish to continue this exploration of depth, of moving from the surface noise to the core signal, consider joining this channel. Every video is an invitation to remember more of who you are. Your liberation doesn't require a grand gesture. It begins now, in the silence of your own awareness, with a single, quiet release.